Assalamu alaikum. Hotel. Hotel. Well, let me first of all express my profound appreciation for the invitation to share a few responses on this evening. I obviously want to acknowledge the family and recall being with the family on many occasions. I reflect back on February 21st, 1990. We did the year of Malcolm X, in which we put over 3,000 people in Athens City Baptist Church. First time my mother actually came out, she said on the night that El-Shabazz was assassinated, and Percy Sutton and Al Van, and so many people were there on that night. So it's a privilege to stand on this sacred ground. I actually live in East Elmhurst, a few blocks from 97th Street. And when John Conyers and other people come, I always take them by and show them the house, the home on Malcolm X Way in East Elmhurst. So again, it's a privilege to be here. Certainly want to acknowledge the brilliant presentation of Professor Ramadan, which was quite profound. And for Imam Talib, my dear friend, who will be following, we work very closely together. We just want to share a few thoughts. First of all, let me just say that I'm struck by one of the initial speakers in terms of the whole question of mental, maybe we talked about the internal piece of internalized oppression. And Malcolm talked about the fact that we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. But he also said that of all the crimes committed by Europeans against Africans, he said the greatest crime was to take our names. I often lecture on that very premise because people do not understand the devastating impact of cultural aggression, particularly on people of African descent in these United States of America, where it was the most brutal form of slavery, not the physical form, but the mental form of the dehumanization, or what Queen Mother Moore used to call the de-Africanization of the African. Not well understood. And so I think that was that was very profound in terms of Malcolm's, understanding in that regard, taking away our names. Just to respond to a few points, there was a discussion about the impact of the Black freedom struggle. How people all over the world were looking to the United States of America in terms of what was unfolding, particularly within the colonial era, as people were resisting this uprising taking place. And the pivotal place that El-Shabazz played in that struggle. And I say that because there's a sense of historical duty and responsibility to continue that. To understand that we do have a certain responsibility, that people do sing, "We shall overcome" in various places. And people do quote Malcolm as they're fighting against oppression. So we who are Africans in America do bear a certain responsibility in that regard. It's a historical duty and responsibility, which is really grounded in the historical concept, the ancient concept of ma'at, really, which is another way of expressing much of what the professor talked about, that we who are Africans have never ever been self-consumed. We go back and look at the teachings of ma'at. It is about justice, it's about righteousness. I mean, it is not only about us, but it is about beyond us. But sometimes we do have to go to that X, because sometimes it has to begin with us. Charity begins at home and spreads abroad. Love thy neighbor as thyself. If one cannot love oneself, it becomes problematic. I think Vignon would even say, perhaps even schizophrenic, to love someone else when you don't love yourself. And by the way, after the Baptist tradition, you can clap and say amen. And so I think this is a point of quite important significance. Question of transformation. For me, it is this journey, and this journey is because, when I think of Malcolm, I always think about it in terms of all of us, particularly our brothers and sisters, the men and women, but the man-child in the promised land today, so many in America's dark ghettos. Malcolm was that. But that genius lodged inside. That genius. And the openness. These were the characteristics. He was not a narrow person. He was open to change. That's why he could evolve. Once you decide that you have it, that you are absolutely convinced, that is a prescription for being stale. and in fact even regressive. We have to always be open to new knowledge, new ideas. And that's what allowed Malcolm to grow and develop. First and foremost, my point is that as we look at our brothers and sisters in America's dark ghettos today, they have it within them. They must come to understand that they have it within them. And we have to understand it so we can help help them flourish and grow. Because if we don't, we give up on the generation of our own people in a way that is highly problematic. Malcolm, in some ways, is the best example for our young brothers and sisters who are struggling in what I call America's dark ghettos. So these roots, again, become important in terms of Malcolm's transformation because he did begin at a certain place and end at a certain place. Next point is about the whole question of the Martin Luther King, and these are not necessarily in the order, Malcolm and Martin. And I was guilty of that for a while, you know what I mean? I was guilty of, well, you know, I'm with Malcolm, but I don't mean Malcolmite, but I kind of juxtaposition in relationship to Martin Luther King. But I do think there was this conversion taking place. They were both assassinated for the same reason. As long as Martin Luther King was just simply talking about the civil rights struggle here, fine. You know, confined to the Negro people here in the United States. When he began to talk about the fact that true compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar, it comes to understand that the edifice which produces beggars needs to be restructured. It's a different proposition. That's a profoundly different proposition. So when Malcolm went to Mecca, he began to see it differently also. It's not just about, it's not individuals. Yes, there are individual races. We dare not forget that. He began to understand a system of white supremacy buttressed by a capitalist political economy. He began to understand that in a very profound kind of way. Now, by the way, I don't think that ever meant that he was like naive about white supremacy. Nor should we be naive about white supremacy today. I don't remember in total the encounter with the white woman, but I thought he also said at one point, if I had it to say all over again, there would be a division of labor. Because there's a lot of work to be done in white communities organizing against white supremacy where it lives. Right? And so that we can be with each other, but we can have perhaps complementary assignments. And we got a lot of work to do in terms of integrating ourselves within the African American community. Hence, with his knowledge, he didn't create the Rainbow Coalition. He created the Organization of African American Unity because he understood the necessity that charity begins at home. Didn't mean therefore that he didn't understand the broader struggle, but he understood that we were not ourselves internally organized. Have difficulty sort of liberating anybody else. But he was always in the traditional African sense of African humanism. King, Martin, Nkrumah, whomever you want to speak to, have always had that understanding. I've already spoken to the question of the power of Malcolm's transformation in America's dark ghettos today. Let me just say, we are in a state of emergency. I talked about this at Mega Evers last night. We have a state of emergency. Yes. In black and brown America. Black America and brown America. It is utterly horrific what is going on in our communities. And it is a sense of a state of emergency without urgency. And I think Malcolm would be speaking urgently to the question of the state of emergency in our community. Finally, a couple of other thoughts. The question of symbols, which Professor Ramadan talked about. We have some difficulties with the phenomenon of Obama's presidency. But you see, if you take both King and Malcolm, I think they both would have responded similarly. I mean, Martin Luther King had a fairly decent relationship with John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. But when it came down to the question of the oppression and suffering of black people and other people, because at the end of his life, that's the other thing that took Martin Luther King out. He was talking about an economic bill of rights for everybody, an economic bill of rights that would ensure for everybody health care, education, housing. That was too much. Poor People's Campaign. People forget that. In terms of not only his opposition to the war in Vietnam, he was talking about a systemic change in this country. And that's why he was taken out. So it's not about not being for Obama. We understand where Obama is, but we also know that even greater than Obama is our necessity to speak truth to power. It's our necessity when our people are hurting and are crying that we have to be on their side, and Obama has to hear that cry one way or another. He has to hear it by any means necessary. He has to hear it. He has to respond to it. And finally, in terms of a response, I just think that these kinds of conversations are profoundly important. And as the professor said, not just because we are talking to each other. There's an old saying back in the day, Junebug Jabbo Jones said, Mr. Saying Nothing, Mr. Do is everything.